Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Tuesday, July 14th, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square's state government reporter. And in today's episode, Governor Bob Ferguson and other supporters of Washington's new income tax today rolled out their No on Initiative 645 campaign. Of course, Initiative 645 is the initiative that is likely going to be on the November ballot, asking voters if they want to repeal the new income tax. So today we're going to share some of that press conference with you, some of the governor's comments, and then also some of the pushback on that from folks who say the income tax for Washington will eventually be an income tax on all of us, not just millionaires. And then we are 3 weeks today away from the August 4th Washington state primary election. Ballots are going to be probably on your tabletop by this time next week, certainly to be mailed out no later than this Friday. So you'll get them either over the weekend or early next week. And today, my conversation is going to be with one of the candidates in Legislative District 42. That's up in the northwest corner of our state, Whatcom County. There are kind of three top contenders for that. Two of them are Democrats, one Republican. Today, a conversation with one of the Republicans who is hoping she can advance past the top two August 4th primary. The other two Democrats did not respond to repeated requests for an interview for this segment and an article as well. So let's dive into today's episode. Governor Bob Ferguson today was in Seattle at Food Lifeline, their headquarters, and that's where he held this big press conference surrounded by supporters of the recently signed into law income tax, or for now, what is a tax on millionaires, those making $1 million or more, taxed 9.9% of that threshold above $1 million, or the combined household income in excess of $1 million. And in this press conference, several people spoke, but I'm going to share with you the governor's comments specifically, and then we'll talk about that a little bit. Now, this income tax repeal initiative, we'll just call it 645. It's got a longer title. It's IP 26, which is the year 2026. IP is Initiative to the People, 645. They've made these initiatives so complicated now. So we'll just call it 645 from here on out, okay? That is the hoped repeal if voters should choose to repeal the income tax. We're waiting right now to find out if, in fact, the Secretary of State is going to certify that for the November ballot. It is likely that that is going to happen. Supporters of the repeal turned in more than 511,000 signatures on July 2nd. They only need about 309,000 of those to be valid voter signatures to qualify. Now, some of those get tossed out because people accidentally sign twice or maybe intentionally sign twice, not realizing you can't do that. Other people sign who are not already registered voters in the state of Washington. Those also get tossed out. But assuming that this is certified, and we'll find out in the next week or so from Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, it will be on the November ballot. So now Governor Ferguson, as I mentioned today, was surrounded by income tax supporters in this press conference, again, held at the headquarters for Food Lifeline in Seattle. Here's part of what he said.
Washingtonians are going to be facing an important choice in November regarding the future of the millionaires tax. It's essentially a choice between moving our state forward by making life more affordable for Washingtonians and giving 138,000 business owners a tax break, or going backwards, rolling back tax breaks for small businesses and seeing costs go up for Washingtonians. It's a choice between investing in our kids' education, and it's great to see some kids here today, by the way. It's a choice between investing in our kids' education and childcare access and affordability, or going backwards with cuts to education and limiting access to childcare. In short, it's a choice between the future and the past. I am confident Washingtonians will see through this attempt to roll back our progress, because that's what they have done before. Hedge manager Brian Heywood is, of course, behind this initiative. It is not his first rodeo. 3 prior attempts he has made to roll back progress in Washington state. Capital gains tax, he put that on the ballot. 64% of Washingtonians rejected his attempt to roll that back. The Climate Commitment Act, Once again, over 60% of Washingtonians rejected his attempt to roll that back. Washington cares. 55% of Washingtonians rejected that attempt to roll back progress. In other words, he's 0 for 3. He is struck out. He's back at the plate again, which is absolutely his right. But it is clear that while Brian Heywood has a vision for this state, it just happens to be a vision that the people of Washington repeatedly reject overwhelmingly.
So from here on out, you will start to see, and as we get closer to November, more and more advertisements on both sides of this heated argument. It's going to be on your TV, your radio, your social media feeds. You're probably not going to be able to get away with it because this is considered to be one of the most contentious ballot issues that has been debated in the state of Washington in any recent history. Now, supporters of the millionaires tax are funded by some pretty deep pockets. They've got the Washington Education Association, which is the state teachers union, some other labor groups, WFSE, SEIU, locals are all dumping tons of money into convincing voters not to repeal the income tax. And then you've got Let's Go Washington and supporters, including the NFIB, BIAW, and others that are going to be dumping money into convincing you to support the income tax repeal. Something that the governor mentioned in that clip we just shared with you, I wanted to provide a little greater context on because he mentioned that Let's Go Washington and founder Brian Heywood were 0 for 3 in previous failed attempts on initiatives. And he mentioned that it was he mentioned the capital gains tax, the Climate Commitment Act, and the Washington Cares Fund taxes. And in fact, Washington voters rejected all three of those repeal attempts. But what the governor failed to mention in that press conference, in that clip you just watched, was that Let's Go Washington has had many successes. And they also have two additional initiatives that are already qualified for the November ballot. We've talked a lot about these. Voters are going to be asked in November if they want to restore the Parental Bill of Rights and if they want to protect girls in sports and keep boys and trans identifying folks out of girls' locker rooms and bathrooms and the like. So the three Let's Go Washington initiatives that actually passed into law successfully were Initiative 2081 that created the original Parents' Bill of Rights, allowing, parents to review school curriculum, medical records, and they can't keep secrets from you. Initiative 2111, that permanently, obviously that didn't work, permanently banned state and local personal income taxes in Washington. The lawmakers went on, as you know, to pass the millionaires tax this year. And Initiative 2113, which loosened police pursuit rules by restoring the reasonable suspicion standard and restoring police ability to again pursue criminals has been credited with a dramatic drop in car theft and many other crime statistics in the state of Washington. In fact, I had a conversation just yesterday on Monday with Federal Mayor Jim Farrell, and I'll be sharing some of those dramatic crime stats with you later this week. And he cited specifically the passage of 2113, allowing police again to pursue criminals in the state of Washington, in large part for bringing down some of those, shocking crime statistics. And then one more that Let's Go Washington was behind was Initiative 2066 2 years ago that protects access to natural gas as an energy choice, and voters approved that one. So not really accurate to say that Let's Go Washington is 0 for 3. So I wanted to provide some accurate comment on that. That's the real record for Let's Go Washington at this point. So Brian Heywood and Let's Go Washington issued a statement just after the governor's press conference today, along with those other folks that are hoping folks will keep the newly passed income tax. And Heywood said this in part. Three public unions, I mentioned these a moment ago, SEIU, WEA, WFSE, are primarily behind this attempt to force an unconstitutional income tax on the state. These three already take in over $150 million every year, yet somehow are exempt from paying any taxes. The public unions have a collection of sock politicians like J.B. Peterson, sponsor of the income tax, and Governor Bob Ferguson, who appear to be in their pocket and who are afraid to stand up and challenge the pig trough agenda of more spending and higher taxes. Again, that was from Let's Go Washington founder Brian Heywood in that statement emailed to the Center Square today. And then Jesse Proudman also issued a statement that went with Let's Go Washington's news release today. He's the founder of Venice AI. Seattle native has continued to voice his concerns about the income tax and the volatility of taxing a wealthy base. And we interviewed Jesse Proudman 2 months ago about his concerns with the income tax. So I wanted to share that with you once again.
Started my first company from my dorm room at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma. That company went on to be acquired by IBM in 2015, and I followed that on with two additional startups here in the state. You know, I remember being a kid in Tacoma, coming to Seattle in early 2000, and just being in awe of the startup community here. I had to do a paper in middle school about technology and startups, and came and interviewed GoToNet executives on the pier at the waterfront. And it was really that experience that motivated me to get up into the startup ecosystem. The reality that you can build and create something from nothing, it's an inspiring vision, and one that really should and can get people ready to sort of pick themselves up from their bootstraps and create the companies that have made this region great. You know, we look at the names that we see in the news on a day-to-day basis: Boeing, Starbucks, Microsoft, Amazon. These are all companies that were started by some founder here in the state and have grown to provide jobs for so many people. And so as I've watched sort of the progression and the villainization of the entrepreneurs in Washington over the last number of years, and then more importantly with this specific law, it's really become frustrating and depressing to think about what this state would be like without that entrepreneurial spirit. The reality is that this law specifically targets and penalizes entrepreneurs. You think about an entrepreneur who starts a business and for many years earns below market wages. And if they are very lucky, a very small chance of success, and they get an exit, they sell their company, the state now comes to take 10% of that success. You compare that to the large corporations that are already earning sort of substantial profits in the state, who aren't going to end up paying any taxes with this illegal and unconstitutional income tax. Like it doesn't logically make sense. And it's not just entrepreneurs, it's small family businesses who also have the same challenge in front of them. Because of the way the tax is structured, sort of pass-through income for LLCs and S-corps ends up being paid as well. So it's really a targeted tax against a very narrow cohort of people in Washington by design. The reality, though, is that the state is not targeting just that cohort. With 300 bureaucrats being hired to go police what is estimated to be roughly 20,000 eligible taxis under the law, it's clear they're building a structure to tax ultimately everybody in the state. And Jamie Peterson has made that clear, that is his intent, and that this is a starting place. And so sort of all of these things, in my mind, really have made this an unfriendly and unfortunate place to do business.
And now this is a Yakima former farmer by the name of John Hubricksy. I think I'm pronouncing that right. A fifth generation farmer. He's no longer in farming, but fifth generation for his family to farm in Yakima. And he attended the July 2nd event in Tumwater at the office of the Washington Secretary of State. When Let's Go Washington turned in those boxes and boxes of all the signed petitions for the income tax repeal. And he spoke at that event, but I haven't shared any of that with you until today. He shared with the crowd that was gathered there that he's not farming anymore because he was losing money. He's now actually a CPA helping other family farmers try to stay in the business. In Washington state, we've been losing an average about 2 family farms a day. I covered a story last year that looked at stats for a 5-year period with a loss of 3,700 family farms in the state of Washington, losing more family farms than any other place in the nation. And he believes that the passage of the income tax for many family farms will actually be the final straw.
They cannot stretch any further. They've suffered year after year after year losses, and that's not a joke. Year after year after year. Their banks cannot stretch any further, and they're going bankrupt. We've lost more than 10% of our family farms in Washington state. Part of the capital intensive nature of farming that is so hard to bear for the family farm when additional regulations and additional taxes are put on the family farm is the competition they now face. If we're growing apples as a family farm, we're not competing with institutional money that is the only source of capital anymore that can compete and suffer through the regulatory environment here and continue on. The family farms cannot. They're not in a position to bear the burden of the taxation and regulatory environment that we now have here in Washington state. What profits there used to be in family farming will no longer stay in my community. They will not be reinvested in our schools. They will not be reinvested in our sports complexes for the kids. They will not be reinvested, period, because the money will flood out of the community when it goes to institutions that are nameless and faceless and somewhere else. The family farms can't bear the burden anymore. The income tax that was passed is just the latest instance of the burden increasing year after year.
Now, Governor Ferguson said today he is entirely confident that Washington voters are going to reject the income tax repeal initiative, while at the same time, Heywood and Let's Go Washington said they're confident that voters are going to vote yes on Initiative 645 to reject the income tax. And again, we're waiting on the Secretary of State to officially certify that measure for the fall ballot. But certainly, given how many signatures were turned in, it is highly likely we're going to see that in November. And now to Washington's 42nd legislative district, up in the northwest corner of the state, Whatcom County, around Bellingham and Blaine, if you're familiar with that part of the state. Pretty deep blue politically for the most part, some little tinier pockets of red, but pretty Democratic stronghold for the most part. But there's a Republican challenger that is very much hoping to at least make it past the August 4th primary, which is 3 weeks from today, and then have voters learn a lot more about who she is. She believes this is the time for change. And as I mentioned in the opening here, you'll be seeing those primary ballots likely in your mailbox this weekend or early next week, as they are scheduled to be mailed out later this week. July 17th is the deadline for that. So Bellingham Democrat Eamon Collins, he announced back in February that he was going to run for that state's Senate seat, which is being vacated by Senator Shoemake. And so it kind of opened up, and a bunch of candidates went in, but it is likely that this Bellingham Democrat Eamon Collins is probably going to be ending up in the top of the tier and potentially advancing after August 4th. He's a science teacher at the Lummi Nation School and chair of Whatcom Democrats. And he followed his announcement to run, followed the announcement of Port of Bellingham Commissioner Michael Shepard, also a Democrat. And I invited both of them to join us for an interview, a video interview, and repeatedly requested that over the last several days and have not received a response from either of them. But I do want to share with you part of an interview from the Republican candidate for Legislative District 42 and that Senate seat up there, because she did respond to me. And this is Blaine School Board member Erika Craig. Again, a Republican and the only GOP contender really in this race at this point. Numerous attempts to get the other two. Again, I did not receive any response. But Craig is a psychologist. She's got a couple of behavioral health facilities that she runs up in Whatcom County, so a small business owner herself. And she told me that she's very concerned about the direction of the state, concerned about education. And obviously, as a Blaine School Board member, she's kind of in the know there. And she's very concerned about struggling business operators in Whatcom County. She wants to see things turn around, and she said that's why she's running.
I have a unique background. My husband and I have small businesses, and we are very keenly aware of so many of the things that happen in Olympia. The decisions that are made are they get railroaded through, and they are crushing small businesses in our community. And we feel it firsthand. We also, we know that some of these ideas, they can seem like a good idea in theory, maybe well-intentioned, but in practical reality implementation stage, they can really crush a small business. And we see a lot of places closing their doors, a lot of people leaving the state, and we can't afford to just not have those organizations represented at the table too, because they are what pay our tax dollars. Those are what our schools feed off of. Those are what our social services feed off of. Those are important too. We need more balance in there, and we need more people who have an understanding of, what it's like to run a small business and what that takes, because we can't lose that sector fully, or we're going to not have no tax base, which is kind of where it feels like we're headed towards. My opponents, they both work as teachers for school districts, one at Western and one at a high school. And so I think it's a really different, those are valuable, important jobs too. But what we really need in Olympia right now is we need people who have an understanding of not just those industries, but also the private industries that pay for those industries in order to keep it all sustainable from collapsing.
So in the days to come, if either of the Democrats running up there for that Senate seat in District 42 end up accepting a request for an interview, I'll be glad to take those and bring you updates in a future episode of Washington in Focus Daily. I do want to share one thing that Eamon Collins said on his website. He said, as the volunteer vice president of the Culshan Community Land Trust, I hope I'm saying that right, I've seen how state and federal housing policies land on residential construction sites in Whatcom County. And he said that's one of the main reasons that he is running. He talks a lot about permanent housing affordability. And then from the website of the other Democrat who is likely to, come out on the top after the August 4th primary, Michael Shepard. He's an educator, community advocate, and three-term Bellingham Port commissioner who's been teaching at Western Washington University for some time. So you can check out either of those candidates' websites for more information. And again, August 4th, the primary, just 3 weeks away. Ballots going out on the 17th, and you still can register to vote. You can actually register to vote for the August 4th primary right up until July the 27th. So you still have plenty of time to do that. You can go to votewa.gov and do that online, or you can go to your local elections office and register in person if you're not yet a registered voter. All kinds of stuff on this. We've obviously got lots of state elected positions that are open. We've got U.S. representative positions that are up, local judicial races, as well as state Supreme Court offices. We've talked a lot about that. And all of these offices, because we are a top 2 primary state, are narrowed down to the top 2 vote getters. There could be 7, 8, 12 candidates running for any given office. It doesn't shake down to one Republican, one Democrat, one independent, whatever. It's just the top 2 vote getters, regardless of party. And again, that is just 3 weeks from today. Hugely important to participate in the August 4 primary. So that's a wrap on today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily for this Tuesday. Always appreciate you watching. Check out our Center Square Washington page for these stories and more. And I hope we'll see you again on Wednesday.